What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Overwatch League report. I'm your host, Timur. I'm filling in for Brian today. He's feeling a little bit under the weather. But as always, I'm joined by Ben.
Hey, how's it going? Ready to talk about some Overwatch League?
Yeah, it was a really exciting weekend of Overwatch. Of course, it was Stage 2, Week 4, and we were in Dallas Homestead this weekend. Which, I mean, the crowd is insane. They really are. They brought their enthusiasm fully.
Yeah, I mean, when you put a crowd in there who's like actually rooting for a home team and not just like a bunch of randoms who are like, because you got to think like 1/20th of every average crowd is going to be rooting for a certain team, so that's not like super exciting, but it definitely is giving kind of a sneak preview for what we'll hopefully see next season when we have more of these home and away games where there is a lot of like home team energy, and Dallas fans really brought the energy.
Yeah, I mean, I was seeing some tweets about like how this is really important for like esports, to make it sort of official, like a real sport, and I really do
Yeah,
think that matter. But anyway, let's get into the games. So of course it was Dallas's homestead, and they brought their A game. I mean, they went 2-0 this weekend, and of course the big game was against Houston, and I mean they kind of utterly destroyed them, eh?
yeah, the battle for Texas. They only dropped one map all weekend, Anubis against the Outlaws. And they definitely stuttered a little bit here and there. Gibraltar on the last match was a little bit iffy. They kind of threw in a couple of places and some team fights that they should have been winning. But otherwise, Dallas definitely came out of this weekend looking like the best team that played. If we're going to even talk about some other teams that kind of came in and people expected them to perform really well, and they kind of also dropped the ball. So yeah, I think that out of the teams that played this weekend, Dallas definitely looked the best, which is obviously appropriate. They had their supporters behind them.
Exactly. And even, I mean, earlier in the season, I really didn't see Dallas as like a big contender, to be honest. And like we have our fantasy league going, and I had OGE on my team at first. I had him and Unko, and I was like, well, I don't really need two, Dallas players. So I got rid of OGE because he wasn't really performing. But this weekend, he fucking killed it, man. He really, yeah, had some crazy moves.
Yeah, no, he definitely carried them through a lot of maps. Had a lot of really clutch shatters on a few maps there. He was great. I think King's Row, he had a couple of really good shatters going. But yeah, he's definitely up there in contention with some of the other top main tanks in the league. I know a lot of people like to talk about Mono and Super and Bumper. Yeah, all these I mean, obviously those are the three main tanks for the three big teams that are like the top ones in the league. But I mean, I think OG has a lot of potential to maybe crack a top five list of main tanks in the Overwatch League.
Yeah, especially after this performance. Although he did try to pull a bumper at one point and
Yeah,
he died right away. Although I think it gave him a bit of time, and then he came back like next spawn and like he saved the point for them after that. But maybe he has a
yeah.
little ways to go till he's like at bumper status. But yeah, for sure this weekend. I mean, he was player of the game, hands down.
And I think a
Uh,
lot, a lot of that kind of comes down to kind of a bigger trend I saw with Dallas this weekend was a little bit of cockiness from them, where they were playing some of these
mhm,
lower ranked, lower tier teams that probably came in with a little bit of overconfidence
mhm,
and kind of want to showing off for their fans, doing all these flashy things,
mhm.
and definitely doing some more dangerous thing. Like I mean, on Gibraltar, as I mentioned, there were multiple times they threw, like for example, the where AKM flanked her on the back with his visor, and they kind of lost point A there in a situation where they could have potentially full held. So I mean, I think it's a lot of their play, a lot of their mistakes from this weekend can just be chalked up to them wanting to show off for their fans and like make these flashy like high risk plays and then them not working out.
Definitely, definitely. And do you think part of that as well comes from the coaches? I know they have a really strong team of, of coaches like Jane. And do you think that comes from these guys who are pretty well known in the community?
Potentially, there's definitely a lot of like gamemanship as far as
Mm,
like Jane trash talking on Twitter and on the
exactly.
stream, etc. And in trying to create this kind of persona around the team as being kind of like these confident to the point of being like annoyingly cocky, even though they aren't necessarily like a top tier team to the point where they
Mm,
should be like the Shock are also a team that gets a lot of flack for being
mm,
like annoyingly cocky,
mm,
but at least the Shock are up there with the Titans and the XLs, potentially being one of the better teams in the league, whereas the Fuel are kind of sitting in that like second tier group of 4 or 5 teams.
mm,
But yeah, I think that it's definitely a much like a very well crafted persona they want to create around their team.
mm. And
Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this weekend definitely, enforced that, and they comfortably, had that persona this weekend. They
yeah,
totally owned it, but in a way, it was a bit, unsurprising. So I do want to talk about something that was a bit more surprising, which was that London was bested by the Hunters. I don't think anyone was expecting that. London, of course, being one of the top teams, and Hunters being, I don't know. Yeah, what do you think? What did you think of that game?
yeah. I mean, the Hunters are so perplexing as a team that it's really
Yeah.
hard to predict any of their individual matches. But yeah, I think that out of the 8 matches that we saw this past weekend, this was the one that went in like that had a winner that was the most unpredictable coming in. The other ones,
Mm,
I would say that the team, even if the scores were closer than they ended up being predicted to be, I think that the team that won each of the other matches was the one that people came in predicting to win. But yeah,
mm,
the Hunters and London match looked real bad for London, and for a team that is locked in for the 4 or 5 slot of the Stage 2 playoffs, that was not a good look for them. For a team that hasn't lost since they made their swaps and put Birdring on Brigida, which I think was a huge boon to the team's success in the stage. They on multiple occasions during that match, C9 the point. There were
yeah.
there were times. Well, the most egregious one being when they were on defense
On King's
on
Row.
Eichenwald. Well,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah.
there was Eichenwald when
Eichenwald,
the
yeah.
Hunters were walking backwards with the cart across the bridge into B, and the Spitfire just were refusing to push up on the cart enough to like
Mm,
actually stop progress, and they just
yeah.
like let the Hunters recap that point. And then there was a second point of Paris where the EMP and the minefield zoned them off the point, and you have Fury trying to go around the back and Badoshan like off to the side, like, not making like a concerted effort to get them the point when they're in overtime, and just like it just seemed like the Hunters like frazzled them, where the Spitfire was heavily criticized in Stage 1 for not playing goats effectively. And after they made this roster swap to putting Birdring on the Brigida and Prophet on the Zarya, they've really turned around their goats mechanics and just teamwork in general. I think
Hmm.
there's a lot more confidence there, but playing up against all of these weird DPS comps that the Hunters pull out, I think really caught them off guard.
Yeah, exactly. I think the Hunters are perhaps the most anti-goats team in the league, and I think that's really what threw them off. Maybe London's been focusing on goats too much, so that I don't know, they were just, yeah, they were thrown off by the lack of goats, if you want to call it that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something to look at. I mean, we're definitely seeing less goats composition this stage than the previous one, but there's still a decent amount. And but there are these DPS comps that we've seen other teams even this weekend, like Dallas, pull out and perform really effectively. So you have to be prepared for all of these potential compositions you're going to run up against. And it looked like in this situation, Spitfire just were not prepared. So
Yeah, exactly.
coming into a stage playoffs where they could potentially make a run for at least into the semis. I think that it's something that to look at.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, let's go through the standings as they are now, and sort of go through the teams that are, definitely considered in, and those who are a little bit on the fence right now. So we have like Gladiators, Shock, Titans, Excelsior, Spitfire. I mean, these are not really surprising. They're all the top teams. But then, you have Dallas Fuel, who, as we've covered, killed it. And I think, there's a good argument for them staying in that top league, at least for now.
Yeah, no, I think that they haven't officially clinched it, but
Mm,
they basically just have to not get shut out by the Mayhem in this final match of the stage, which seems
which,
like it should be a given.
yeah,
So I think that we can safely pencil in the Fuel for the stage two playoff, which is really exciting for them, given how they were such a close miss for the stage one playoffs, where they lost that map five to Boston and lost that final slot
yeah.
basically by the skin of their teeth. So yeah, I'm excited to see what the Fuel can do in this playoffs, and then that will leave us with two extra slots here that are yet to be filled.
Exactly.
And
And as you mentioned, I don't think Boston is in it anymore,
yeah,
unfortunately.
I mean
um,
they technically are if they can go 8-0 and then a couple of other things happening, but
hmm,
they're not going to forward the Gladiators.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think I can safely say that. So
Yeah. So then under Dallas we have Hangzhou and Seoul. Do you think they'll be staying in there and where they are right now?
well, these two teams are very interesting because they are playing each other in each of their final match of the stage. The actual final match of the regular season stage two, the last game on Sunday will be the Spark versus the Dynasty. And given that the Dynasty's
Mm,
other matchup is against the Titans, which I think that it's safe to say that they're very unlikely to win, given their past two performances against that team.
hmm,
It seems like it's going to come down to whether the like whichever team wins this match is going to take this seventh slot in the stage playoffs. Because the Spark are 4-2 right now, but they're 4-2 with a very bad map differential.
hmm,
And the Soul are 3-2, probably going to be 3-3 after the Titans match, but they have a very good map differential. So
hmm.
it seems like this seventh slot is going to come down to whichever of the two teams wins that match between the two of them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so I do want to talk a little bit about the other teams that played like Seoul, who, I mean, they're not playing Fisher, which I found surprising because I consider him to be one of the best, Reinhardt's in the league, if not the best. And, you know, that people say it's, maybe he's just too dramatic with the team, or he's not so much a team player as much as like a leader that they kind of have to, form around. Why do you think they're not playing Fisher?
I mean, I think that there's a number of things, and you touched upon a couple of them. But I mean, Marvel is a really strong main tank that has been performing very well. So I think that they have kind of found this new squad that was originally called the B Squad when they were running it against teams like the Justice and the Mayhem. But it seems like they are sticking with it as their main little core here with Fitz in there as well.
Hmm.
Um, so I think the main reason is just because we are still seeing primarily goats. Like I mean, it's less than it was last stage, but it's still 60 to 70%. I would say of
Hmm.
the compositions that we're seeing. Most maps we're at least seeing it on some points. Generally, it seems like people are playing or teams are playing a more DPS heavy composition for the first point, and then kind of swapping off to goats for the later points when you kind of get into like these more inside points on escort maps or these like kind of chokier points on assault maps, for instance.
Hmm.
So I think that when you're looking at the goats set up for this team, Fisher does not really fit that model very well because, as you said, he's not particularly well known as being a team player. He's kind of bumper esque in his his want to be the star and to go off and do these like crazy like singular moves to like win the point single handedly. And it's not really the play style that you can build Goat's composition around. It works for the Titans because they have such great individual talent, because they have this existing team synergy that they've had for over a year now. But
Exactly, and I think as we've seen in the past, the last few times Fisher has played, I do think the other teams are aware of it, and they once they take out Fisher, they've basically won that
right,
battle,
yeah,
and I guess that's something you just can't risk. The other player that I also want to talk about, particularly because he's on my fantasy league, is Kareev, who I feel like LA Valiant. Obviously, they're not considered they're considered at the bottom of the tier right now, but I do feel like every time they play Kareev, they pull it together. And even when they played against Dallas owned them three in a row, and then they finally put in Kareev, and then they started to make a comeback, and Kareev was playing really strongly even after like sitting out 3 games. I don't know, why are they benching him, man?
I think a lot of it has to do with kind of confirmation bias, where they're putting in Kareev on maps where his play style is more accustomed. So
Hmm.
like these maps where you have these long sites where you can get these like crazy pickoffs, and so he's being put in these situations where he's expected to perform highly. I think this is
Hmm.
something that I also talked about in the preseason about Giannis, where he was kind of played on the XL in these situations over Mano, where he was being put into situations where he was expected to outperform because they were like choosing to select him for those specific situations, those specific
Hmm.
maps. And so his stats are padded because of that. I think that Iziaki is really, really underrated flex support, even as somebody
Yeah.
who is hyped up as one of the better players on the team. So I don't think that the decision to put in Iziaki versus Kareev on that flex support role is really the issue for the Valiant. I think that the main issue for the Valiant has just been them playing around Fate, not letting him get out of position, keeping him under control, and like making him play this more reserved goat style that we kind of talked about. And I think that they did this really well in their second match of the in the weekend, where they almost beat the Seoul Dynasty. They took them to map 5,
Hmm.
and it was relatively close. Map 5 wasn't particularly close, but the other maps in the series were pretty good.
Hmm.
The non-control maps were all relatively close. So I think that they're definitely improving. This new roster is definitely better for them. They've won a couple of matches. I think they're playing at a higher level overall. But yeah, it's still like it's going to be a very hard road valley to even potentially squeak into this top 12 that we're going to need for the overall playoffs at the end.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately. But I guess it's to be expected.
Yep.
Before we wrap it up, is there anything else you want to talk about, Ben?
No, I think that yeah, just to preview next week, I think the most exciting match is going to be that very last one, the one that's going to decide whether the Spark or the Dynasty get in. I think looking at the Hunters and the Dragons, one of the two of those teams is likely to take that eighth slot. I think the Hunters are probably slightly more likely, but it could be either one of them. I think that if the Hunters do take it, seeing them play in a stage playoffs would be really cool. They came into the league really underrated. And I think
Hmm.
that at this point, the meta is to a point where it really kind of supports their playstyle.
Hmm.
Where last stage, they played goats very infrequently in a meta where it really was very difficult to actually get map wins not playing goats. And this stage, they have shown that these DPS compositions can take wins off of top teams who aren't really accustomed to playing against them. And I think that as more balanced patches likely come in the future, that will theoretically make goats even less of an auto pick. We're going to see the hunters probably stay in this like low tier 2 situation. So I'm very excited to see what they can do if they do make the stage playoffs and going forward. They're a really fun team to watch. So the more hunters matches I can watch, the happier I am.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, I guess that's it for this week. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow us on Twitch and YouTube. We stream every week. We post videos. We have a lot of stuff that's even, non-Overwatch related, even though that's kind of our jam right now. We're probably going to play it right after we log off this.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, make sure to follow Ben on Twitter, which will be linked below. I don't have a Twitter, but follow Brian. Brian is writing for the Game House right now, and he's doing amazing work for them, writing about Washington Justice and Shanghai. And yeah, thanks for watching.
He also just covered that really fun Hunters London game. So
check that out. Oh, it's a great write-up on it. All right, and we have a blog too, so check that out. Brian's a great writer. Anyways, thanks for watching.
WeCoulda-Get-Everything.com.
Yeah, we get everything on. I'm not great at outros, but thank you for watching. Bye.